Hello everyone. First, a quick word for English speakers. Hello everybody. If you want to follow the conversation in English, I invite you to choose the English channel at the bottom of your screen by clicking on the button that looks like a globe. Thank you. My name is Clara Laborie. I'm a doctoral student at Grenoble Alpes University, and I have the honor of hosting this event today. There are many of you here today, and we'd like to thank you very much for coming and for your interest in doctoral studies in France, and especially at Grenoble Alpes University. First of all, a few instructions. To ensure that everything runs smoothly, please leave your microphones and videos switched off. However, you can post your questions in writing in French or English using the chat room, and we'll collect them and ask them for you. There will be two sequences: a roundtable discussion on doctoral studies in general, with testimonials from doctoral students, followed by a sequence on international questions. According to our statistics, 48% of you are international. So I think you'll be especially interested in this aspect. You will then be able to join one of the themed doctoral schools and talk to the directors and doctoral students. At Grenoble Alpes University, the doctoral program is run by the Doctoral College, and it's Pierre Lemonde, its director, who is here with me, who will be opening this forum. Good morning, Pierre. Pierre, you are the director of the Doctoral College, a research director at the CNRS, which is a national research body, and as such, you carry out your research in quantum physics at the Néel Institute. Can you tell us a bit about the Doctoral College? Thank you, Clara. So the Doctoral College, as you said, is the part of the Grenoble Alpes University that is responsible for the institution's doctoral policy, and as such it federates the 13 thematic doctoral schools on the site. Each doctoral student is enrolled in one of the 13 doctoral schools according to the scientific discipline, and you in fact will have the opportunity to meet them later on. What does a PhD at Grenoble Alpes University represent? Doctoral studies at the UGA involve around 3,000 doctoral students, roughly 50% of whom are international students. They carry out their research in our laboratories on a daily basis, and they make a major contribution to the university's scientific reach. It is this scientific quality, in fact, that enables the UGA to be at the top of French and international rankings. Doing a PhD at the UGA means benefiting from the highest quality of qualifications. The French PhD is recognized throughout the world, but a PhD at the UGA is a passport to employment, particularly for international careers in both academia and business. Would you like to say a final word to the students who are with us today? Yes, I'd just like to tell them that there's a big difference between a bachelor's or a master's degree and a PhD. The PhD is a kind of first job, and while there are many different ways of doing a doctorate, the thing that unites us all, as you will discover, is that we're all doing research. And in this period of major environmental and societal transition, we are facing substantial challenges relating to global warming, health problems, democracy and its representation, new economies, international law. And to meet all of these challenges and find solutions, we need research in all these areas. Research is very important. And so we need PhD students, we need you. So apply now to the UGA to do your PhD. Now, I'll now hand back over to Clara, who is in fact a doctoral student at the SG or Management Sciences Doctoral School. She teaches at the Grenoble INP Felmer Engineering School, and is doing her research at the CEREG Laboratory, Centre for Studies and Research Applied to Management. She will soon be a doctor, as she will be defending her thesis in a week's time. And I'd just like to specify that she was the 2022 winner of the Grenoble Academy's My Thesis in 180 seconds. So well done for that. And I would like to thank you for agreeing to host this event. It's with great pleasure. Thank you very much, Pierre, for that introduction. I can free you now. And can I have your microphone, please? So we can now start our overview of PhD studies, the aim of which is to explain what a PhD is and why, and above all, how to do a PhD. And you'll soon realize that a PhD is very different from the studies you have experienced up until now. And for this, I have 4 speakers with me, whom I would like to introduce you to. On my left, I have Fabrice Emeriot. Hello. Hello. Fabrice, you are Assistant Director of the Doctoral College. You're also in charge of tuition in Health Technology Sciences, STS, as well as a university professor teaching at Grenoble IMP NC3, and you're a researcher at the 3SR laboratory. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? Well, my field of speciality is civil engineering, and more specifically, I'm interested in interactions between civil engineering structures, so geotechnical aspects applied to various structures and applications, railways, tunnels, major infrastructures for producing energy, dams, wind turbines, etc. Then we have Destin Nzengiba. Hello, you are a Gabonese doctoral student in your 3rd year at the Earth, Environmental and Planetary Sciences Graduate School, the STEP School, and you are carrying out your research at the Institute of Earth Sciences. Can you tell us in a few words about your academic career and the focus of your current research at the laboratory? Thank you, Clara, for your question. So, as you've said, I'm from Gabon. I did my primary and secondary schooling there. After my baccalaureate, I did a mathematics option, and then I joined a geophysical engineering school in Strasbourg. After that, I obtained my engineering diploma and a master's in research, and I decided to do a PhD after that. And just in a few words, my research field is geophysics. It consists in exploring what you have underground, and in my thesis, I'm especially interested in the use of new technologies based on the use of optical fibers. And we need to remember that you were in the final of the My Thesis in 180 Seconds in 2023. On my right, I have the pleasure of welcoming Lucas Verotto. Hello, hello. Luca, you are an Italian doctoral student in your 3rd year at the Doctoral School of Material, Mechanical, Environmental, Energy Process and Production Engineering, so EDI MEP squared, and you are carrying out your research at the Materials and Process Science and Engineering Laboratory, CIMAP. Can you tell us a little bit about your academic career and the focus of your current research? Yes, thank you, Clara, for this introduction. Yes, so I'm Luca Cavarotto. I'm Italian, but I was born in Brazil. I started my studies in science and materials engineering at the Federal University at São Carlos in Brazil. Sorry, I was doing an engineering degree there. And I was selected to come to France to continue my studies as a joint student. And I finished both my degrees, and I decided to continue with a PhD, a CIFRA PhD in partnership with a company, therefore, and my research project consisted in studying and understanding the relationships between microstructures of metal alloys for applications in companies, trying to understand how the microscale of a material helps you exploit the properties of material. Thank you, Luca. And we'll finish now with Agata Urbanovic. Hello, hello. Agata, you are Polish and you're a doctoral student at the Doctoral School of Human, Political and Territorial Sciences, EDSHPT, under joint supervision with Swansea University. You carried out and continue to carry out your research at the Inter-University for Psychology, Personality, Cognition and Social Change. Can you tell us in a few words about your academic career and the focus of your current research? Yes, of course. So I'm Polish. I arrived in France after my A-levels in Poland. I started my studies in Montpellier in medicine, and then I decided to move to psychology. I continued in Montpellier, so 4 years in neuropsychology, and my last year of study was carried out in some to-dos. So I did a research master's, and then I applied to do different PhDs, and I started my PhD in Grenoble on the subject of parental burnout. So this is a thesis that I'm doing in co-supervision with the Swansea University in Wales, and I'm continuing my research on these subjects, the subject of parental burnout. So I'm focusing on professional burnout too. And it's important to specify that you were the winner of the innovation thesis in 2023 that rewards an exceptional thesis that involves an innovative process or methodology. So we're going to be able to go right to the heart of the matter now. Why do a thesis? And to begin, I'm going to turn towards Fabrice for the first questions. First of all, what is a thesis? How long does it last? And perhaps we could clarify what a doctoral student is. Well, there are different things we can say by way of an answer. What is a thesis? Well, generally speaking, it's a university diploma. It's the highest university diploma in France, and this is something that you can find in other countries across the world. It's characterized by knowledge. I'm sorry, there is somebody else speaking on the line. I'm sorry, I can no longer hear the speaker. I'm sorry, the interpreter can no longer hear the speaker. So it's about professional experiences and practice. How long does it last? Well, it depends on the status of the doctoral student. We can perhaps talk about that more in detail later on. But a thesis can be done at full time, and the expected duration is therefore 3 years. It can also be done on a part-time basis, and that can last up to 6 years. And concerning the specific status of a doctoral student, what can you tell us? It's a status that involves the complexity of the work on a thesis. It's a student who goes through to the very end of their experience. The student will have a diploma, but it's also somebody who most of the time is going to be considered as an employee with a contract and financing to be able to do their research. So there's a dual status, student and normally employee. Thank you very much for these first information. I imagine that many of you are wondering, why do a thesis? What will it give me? And let's listen to the testimonials from our doctoral students. Luca, why did you decide to do a thesis, and what did it bring you? I decided to do a thesis when I realized that I loved studying. So I wanted to really get to the bottom of things, certain subjects that interested me. So I was always very inquisitive. I wanted to go further and further in the study of certain themes. So when I identified that part of me, I said to myself, well, maybe I should continue my education as a doctoral student. This was something that seemed to be in line with who I was, with my profile. And that's why I decided to do a PhD. There we are. And what about afterwards? What do you do with a thesis? Agatha, perhaps you are in the best position to tell us something about this. I think it really depends on the field. There are many different opportunities. As far as I'm concerned, I continued my research and teaching, but I can go into the private sector if I want, or I can work in a clinic. I'm a clinician after all. And if we talk about why people want to do a thesis, perhaps you can tell us about your personal reasons for this, Destin. Well, personally, doing a PhD, I wanted to have a professional project. In fact, I have had a professional project for a long time that consists in doing research and development in a company. So that was my motivating factor. And also I did a placement at the end of my study that helped me with this. So that was my main reason for doing doing a PhD. So when you are an engineering student and you are a graduate and you have lots of different, possibilities, you could be recruited by various people. Why would you decide to do a PhD? Well, I'd say that to have more detail about the research I was doing, because after my engineering school, I thought maybe I could focus more on research in order to go dig deeper into what I was studying and link that with a company. And then there's the possibility of working directly. But, it's about pushing things further when you do a PhD. Fabrice, perhaps you could summarize what the major opportunities are for a PhD. Well, the major opportunities, they're what we have seen with our doctoral students and doctors who we have with us here. There's a whole variety of different professional openings. The first, of course, that was mentioned was continuing to with your academic research, with an association between research and teaching, or just research in structures like the CNRS or INSERM in France. But it's not the only opening. Increasingly, there are private structures. There are companies, obviously, who want to recruit doctors for their research and development and innovation activities, innovation in the broad sense of the term. So in order to produce innovation and research, but also for management purposes, training that PhD students have, their skills that they develop over the 3-year period, allow them to, look at all of these different themes, and continuing pure research is one opportunity, continuing research and innovation in various structures. And there are also international openings. You can have, so the PhD diploma is very well recognized. It's a great business card for opening doors and finding a contract, whatever that might be, internationally. When you want to do a thesis in your field, in human and social sciences, and you're already employed, why would you do that? Well, it means that thanks to your PhD, because of the skills developed, it means that you can speed up, your professional career development in whatever structure you're working in. It's also about another vision. It's about having hindsight to certain activities that can be developed. You've got an overview of different things. Thank you very much. It's true that being a doctoral student, it's about having two roles, being a researcher and an employee, because you can have financing, but it's also about being a student and continuing your education. And as part of the PhD, there are different courses that are obligatory in a doctoral cycle. The CIFRE thesis is a special example of this. Can you tell us about that, Fabrice? Tell us about the obligatory training that you have as part of a PhD. Well, there are certain things that are obligatory. There are others that are complementary to the education that you have as a PhD, and that students are able to follow. There is training that can provide support in different sectors. There are 3 main fields, let's see. Technical training, scientific and technical education, where you can discover new fields, where you can deepen knowledge in a specific field. Then there are cross-cutting fields, so long-term training programs, drafting of various documents. And then there are other training programs that are more professional, vocational, where you're focusing on your professional project. So basically, it's these 3 parts that you can explore. Now, to illustrate things, could one of you explain to us the kind of training that you've been able to follow as a PhD student? Yes, of course. So I followed different training programs. I also focused on a label. There are European labels, so I focused on a European label. It's a company project. Labels are training cycles, different training cycles, focusing on research and teaching, for example. It's something that allows you to follow training for a long time, like a year, and to be supported by experts. So for me, it was something that was very enriching, very fulfilling, even if it wasn't necessarily linked to the subject of my thesis. I focused on innovation, but I've also followed other training programs, drafting of scientific articles, for example, training on how to teach, because when you're a PhD student, you can teach. Training also that was more technical on statistics, different software program for processing statistical data. These are the things that come to mind. And just to add to that, Luca, when you're an engineering graduate, what kind of training did you then turn to? Well, the UGA offers a whole catalogue of different training programs for PhD students, and you'll have the opportunity to follow lots of different kinds of courses. Personally, I was interested in my first and second year on different themes that were mainly technical, that were focused on engineering and material science. So, for example, I followed training linked to what I was doing. I wanted to widen my knowledge, but I was also interested in doing training programs that focused more on the type of research. Some of these are obligatory now for PhD students. And also, I followed training that gives an introduction to, how you defend your ideas and the quality of data. So we're working a lot today with data acquisition and processing, and it's important to know how to do this on a more qualitative basis. How to do it in a better way, to have better data processing quality. So I followed training in line with my interests. Thank you very much for that testimonial. Before we move on to the next sequence, I suggest that we take one or two questions. So the first that is in front of us, as a doctoral student can be an employee, does the doctoral student pay into a fund for retirement? The answer is very simple, yes. So next question, somebody doing a PhD on a professional basis, can they teach? This is what Agatha was saying. So can they teach at the university? I don't know what you mean by a professional PhD. Yes, somebody following training through research with an industrial agreement, yes. So yes, absolutely, there's no obstacle to teaching. There's no incompatibility with that. It might even be said that it's a positive thing. It's good to have research background, but also corporate background. It's something that's highly appreciated. Thank you very much for all of these insights. I suggest that we now move on to the second sequence. How do we actually apply to do a PhD, and how do you go about doing one? What we need to know before anything else is that there are a certain number of prerequisites to this. The first, of course, is the most important. You have to have a master's degree or an engineering degree. And for international degrees, you need to be reviewed by a committee to determine whether your diploma is an equivalent. Perhaps we could have some context from you. Yes, it's not the UGA that decided this. This is a decision that relates to the general context for PhD studies. You have to have a master's or an engineering degree, but there's also the possibility to do a PhD in France with a foreign diploma. Generally speaking, what is required in your application for the jury to judge is to have a list of articles, a list of marks. And as the PhD is about research activity, you also have to be able to demonstrate through your master's that you already have a first experience in research through a placement or by writing a master's thesis. These are the main things that are looked at by a jury to see whether you have the equivalence or whether you have to do preliminary French studies. So there are prerequisites if you want to do a PhD. So let's now move on to a subject that everybody's been waiting for. How do you concretely find a subject for your thesis and what's needed to support it? Financing. Fabrice, perhaps you can tell us about the different practices between SHS and STS. I don't know whether we should categorize these things, SHS and STS. There are different ways of finding financing. You might answer a call for applications. At the UGA, for example, in each doctoral school, there are a certain number of financing programs that are awarded. So it's like a competition. So you choose the best candidates in terms of training, subject, and supervision. So that's a first way. It's more about, answering a call for applications, that first aspect. Or you can have a subject that you want to develop, and you might talk to your teachers about this, and you might be able to do this in your original university, as long as you find a researcher and a teacher who wants to and can help you with your focus on the subject and help you to develop that. Either you can find a subject as part of a call for applications, or you can develop your own subject. There's you don't have to really differentiate between SHS and STS. Lots of doctoral schools will consider both. Thank you for saying that. This time, perhaps you can illustrate what's just been said. In your case, how were you able to find your thesis subject? Well, basically, in my case, I responded to a call. There was an engineering school, it was rather the university in Strasbourg. So I received a thesis offer. I was already very interested in the subject, and naturally I applied to do this thesis subject. And it took 2 months between the time I applied and the time things became concrete. There were different interviews that I had to go through. I had to send my marks, and everything went smoothly. But I was very lucky, I have to say, because I applied for the thesis during COVID, so it was in 2020. Yes, I did that too, says Clara. So the process went well, basically. So if we can summarize then, when you want to do a PhD, there are 2 main ways of doing this. Either, as Fabrice said, you turn to the university where you are, you get into contact with a researcher or teacher able to supervise research work, somebody who will be able to talk to you about a possible subject, so you really have to have a relationship with that person. Or in different universities and doctoral schools that you're interested in, you can consult their website at UGA, this is possible, to see what the offers are, what thesis offers are, and the labs, look at the laboratory sites as well. And take Campus France, there are offers throughout France according to discipline that are posted on the website. And there is also Euraccess, the European platform that allows you to go abroad to do a thesis. Now, just to give you some information about the financing for PhDs, at UGA, we have 120 UGA doctoral contracts, 120 are linked to calls for projects. Other contracts can be added onto that. We've got 10% of theses at UGA that are CIFRE theses, so industrial research agreements. So this kind of thesis offers different advantages, not always very well known. I expect that some of you have heard about the CIFRE thesis for the first time, but we have two representatives here with us, Lucas and Destin, who are doing these theses based on an industrial agreement for training through research. So you work with a laboratory and a company or a local authority. So the doctoral student is recruited and benefits from a 3-year fixed-term contract or even a permanent contract with a minimum salary of 23,484 euros. But in fact, only 10% of CIFRE theses are still at this minimum level. On average, it's more 31,000 on a yearly basis, and this can even rise to more than 60,000 euros in certain specific fields. As the doctoral student already has a foot in the company, there is a high percentage of subsequent recruitment at UGA. 90% of CIFRE PhD students find a job 6 months after their thesis. So, Lucas and Destin, perhaps you can tell us about your experience with the CIFRE thesis. How did you find your subject? How did you find the company? What were the approaches that you followed? Lucas. Well, I was a kind of a special case because right at the beginning of my placement, so I'd done different theses in line with industry. I went to see how I could apply for a PhD with these companies. So there were two options for me. The first, I could go directly to the company sites and see what they were looking for. So that was one possibility. But there was another possibility. I could go and have a look at ANRT sites where you have CIFRE thesis lists that are published. So things that are going to take place within the space of the next year. So I looked at what was about, but I also negotiated a thesis with the company where I'd done my placement. So I underlined things very clearly that I wanted to do an industrial thesis. The subject of my placement was something that I found very interesting, that I liked the team that I'd worked in. So I had a very good relationship with my professor at the engineering school. So I negotiated my thesis and the company agreed to finance it. And today my teacher is my supervisor, and so we've worked on the project together and the financing was accepted, and that's how it went. Thank you very much for that testimonial. Let me just specify that the ANRT is the French National Association for Research and Technology, so it's a private sector association, and it is a cross-sector public-private network for French research. It offers its members, so companies and local authorities who pay their dues, the best possible conditions for exchange, debate and confrontation to build a shared strategic vision and a force for action. So it brings together doctoral students with companies with specific projects and questions in all kinds of different fields, the ones that we have mentioned. And to come back to our testimonials, Destin, concerning yourself, was it easy to do this CIFRE thesis? And going back to the training that we were talking about earlier on, was it complicated for you to juggle between your obligations to the laboratory, your training, and working in the company? How do you manage that? Well, my case is simpler than Lucas. The thesis offer was already affiliated with my company. I just had to apply, go through interviews with the company, but the deadlines for the ANRT were quite tight. I started things at a later date, in fact. I started my PhD at a later date. I was able to juggle between the company and the laboratory. It's not easy, though, but I managed it. and I managed it well. So globally, so I'm in the research laboratory where I talk with other researchers, but when I'm in the company, it's usually for assignments that are for the company. So, talking about the schedule and managing both, it's been fine. So it's important to underline for everybody following us that whatever the type of contract that frames your PhD, it's not, if you do a CIFRE thesis, this obviously allows you to put a foot in the door of a company or another organization. If you have a doctoral contract, you're financed directly by a laboratory, but that doesn't mean to say that the world of the company is completely closed to you. So you have to say to yourself that it does orientate things, but the possibilities are still quite endless. Yes, I just wanted to add something about the question of financing. As you said earlier on, 120 doctoral contracts are given out by the university, and about the same number in terms of university financing. And there are 80 CIFRE theses. So doctoral students sign up for the first year at the university, but that only takes up a fairly small share of cases. So there are 3 financing modes. But in fact, there is a whole range of possibilities behind those 3 modes. Perhaps the most obvious is perhaps for international students. They can come and do a thesis in France, in Grenoble, with financing from their country, from their own country, or national French financing, as we will hear more about in the next sequence. But then there is financing that can be found through research contracts between a laboratory and a company, or financing research contracts for laboratories obtained from Europe or from other structures, whether these be national or international. So there's a whole range of different financing possibilities. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those details. Let's now move on to the questions. Is there an age limit for doing a PhD? Well, normally no. So I was joking earlier on with Pierre, after my career as a researcher and teacher, maybe I'll do another PhD, but in a completely different field. Why not? No, there's no age limit for applying to do a PhD. Now, if we're working full-time, either in the private sector or the public sector, is it possible to do a thesis at the same time? That's another question. It's not impossible, but at the full-time work in your original structure, in your original company, has to be modified. The assignments that are fulfilled need to be modified so that it's possible for the doctoral student to develop knowledge as well and write up their thesis and defend that thesis. So it's not impossible, but it's important to talk about these things with the structure, with the hierarchy, with the human resources team, to make sure that part of the work time can be devoted to research. And when you're a foreign student and you want to do a thesis, notably at Grenoble Alpes University, are the registration fees different? It seems to me that they're not different. Okay, well, we'll get back to the person asking that question about that. We'll give you some more details in the chat. I was going to say that it depends on the original country, if it belongs to the EU community or not. And one last question. Do you keep your status as a student for the residence permit for students who are outside of the European Union, for example? I don't really have the complete answer to that, but it seems to me that the financing mode needs to be recognized. Well, you need to be recognized by the rectorate, what's called the academy, as a student. But if you've got if you're doing a CIFRE thesis, you're considered as an employee more than a student. So the procedures might be a little bit different, let's say. Thank you very much, Fabrice. Thank you, Destin and Lucas, for your very precious testimonials. I'm going to free you now. We're going to have 3 new speakers, François Pradal, Camille Guilluy, and Manuel Venier, to talk about, among other things, international mobility, jointly supervised PhDs, and welcoming international students. And Agatha is going to stay with us for this last sequence. So while our guests are settling in, it's worth remembering that the PhD is the highest level of university degree in France and in the world, and that it's recognized internationally and better than others. So the PhD, and the French PhD in particular, is a passport for international possibilities for anybody who wants to do a PhD. But here we're going to be talking about 2 aspects. Possible mobility as part of a thesis and as part of a co-supervised thesis. So for this third sequence, we're going to be focusing on international aspects and the financing of this kind of mobility and co-supervision. So let me introduce to you our 3 speakers who have now joined us. First of all, on my left, I have François Pradal. Hello, hello. François, you are Head of Research Programs and Promotion at Campus France. Basically, you're in charge of making PhDs more attractive and promoting research. Yes, absolutely. All of the international students who come, who are excellent students, we only have excellent students for our PhDs and for research in France. They come from all countries and all universities. Just to the left of you, we have Camille Guilluy. Hello. Hello, Clara. You're in charge of jointly supervised theses at the International Relations Department at the UGA Doctoral College. Yes, I am. I set up co-supervised theses. We'll talk about those later on at UGA, but also at other partner foreign universities. So we can't wait to have more information about that. And then on my right, I have Manuel Venier. Hello. Hello. So you are in charge of the International Students and Scholars Office, ISSO. Yes. And I'll tell you more about that in a little while. So let's start this panel discussion with Campus France. So I will turn naturally towards François Pradal. Can you tell us in a few words what Campus France is and what it's for a student? Well, just in a few words, Campus France has 2 main missions. The first is to promote and make things attractive for students across the world. It's the possibility of doing studies and a PhD or research in France that needs to be attractive, that needs to attract students. So Campus France works in over 150 countries. So we work with higher education centers here and abroad. We make sure that the information is available. So if I'm Mexican or Chinese or American or German or Brazilian or from Gabon, these students need to have the information. What path do they need to follow? It's about facilitating their approaches. So that's what Campus France does. We manage subsidies as well. We manage grants from Europe, but also from France, but also from foreign governments, so that the grant is paid and that payment is facilitated. And so we also facilitate cultural activities in the universities. Thank you. I'd like to come back to the question of subjects and funding. As already mentioned, we have a lot of international students with us today. And they're probably saying to themselves, okay, I'm abroad, I'm foreign, how can I find a subject and funding? Can you give us some information about the kind of approach that needs to be implemented by students? It's true that at doctoral level, it's like haute couture with respect to the master's or bachelor's degree. It's difficult to know what the path is. There are lots of conditions needed. You need to have a network. there's a portal that provides information, but it's not enough just to have found a subject for sciences, technologies and health. You've got to have professors, you've got to have letters of recommendation, you've got to have people who are familiar with different types of corporations abroad. So there's a whole range of different paths. And then there's the financing battle. Either you're part of the 120 with the doctoral student offered by Grenoble Alpes University, or you have to find a kind of an assemblage, and we'll come back to that later. You have to find the right subject first of all. You have to, or in the case of human and social sciences, you have to put forward a subject and then look on these.fr whether the subject hasn't already been dealt with or whether it's been dealt with differently. So it's this whole approach. It's an approach. It's about having the right contacts, the right information. It's about creating your network. And little by little, it's about creating an approach, and that does take time. You have to think about it well ahead of time, even before finishing your master's, because perhaps the best way of going about things to prepare your doctorate is to be doing a master's at the university where you want to do your PhD. Perhaps that's the simplest method. Thank you very much for that information. We understand that there's a possibility of finding diverse sources of financing in France, but also internationally. And of course, there is the idea of co-supervised thesis, and I'm now going to hand over to Camille, who's going to explain what a co-supervised thesis is and how it works. Well, concretely, a co-supervised thesis is a joint doctoral degree. So you do your thesis in two universities, one French university and one foreign university. It's called, co-supervision. So you are attached to two universities. You've got two supervisors, at least. It can be more. Each one is attached to the university. The doctoral student is attached to both universities from an administrative point of view. That means that they have to register in each university. The registration fees alternate so that there is no double invoicing. Training is lightened. You can't expect them to do 120 hours in each university. So the time spent abroad is validated for France, and the training carried out in one or other of the universities recognized by both establishments. Perhaps we can also specify that, when you have a co-supervised thesis and contract, this helps with lots of things. Perhaps you can give us some information, examples of what you do right from the start. So the co-supervised thesis, what do? You define mobility periods that are very important to justify the fact that you're doing a dual diploma. You have to spend at least 1/3 of your time in the partner university or in France. So for a 3-year thesis, that's 12 months. After that, there's only one manuscript. I'm sorry, but there is interference. So you can then defend your thesis at the Grenoble University or at Swansea University in Wales. So that's an excellent transition for Agatha, because you are a fully fledged doctor. You defended your thesis in July 2022, so well done. But you did your thesis under joint supervision with Swansea University in Wales in the United Kingdom and Grenoble University. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? What was it like doing a jointly supervised thesis? How did it go when you registered? What about the logistics? Yes. So it was a co-supervised thesis. I started my thesis at UGA, and I was supposed to spend the second half of my thesis in Swansea. So that was the initial plan, but it had to be modified because of the health situation across the world. So the university is closed here in France, but also in the UK, where they were closed for a longer time. So we had to modify our plan, and we had to change some of the studies that we planned to do. So I didn't go to Swansea at the end of the day after a year and a half as planned. I went for conferences, I went to meet my thesis supervisors. I was in contact with them the whole time. I had 4 supervisors, 2 in France and 2 others in Swansea. So we had meetings every month. So I was very well supervised by the 4 thesis supervisors. However, all of my studies were carried out in France on the French population. It would have been good to have a half and half situation, so for the data that was acquired, but it wasn't possible. So in spite of the context, what does this co-supervised thesis help you with? You're Polish and you carried out your thesis in France and in the UK. What were the advantages of that? What can you tell students who are thinking of maybe doing the same thing? What can you tell us? It was a very rich experience. I was very lucky to have extraordinary supervisors. I was able to benefit from their experience and their reputation. I was helped by experts here in France, but also experts who were Welsh. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to Swansea. That would have been even more fulfilling as an experience. But, just being in contact with them, just knowing about their realities, the realities of the academic world over there, allowed me to draft my thesis in English, because the Swansea supervisors were not French-speaking. So it was this linguistic richness that being able to, defend my thesis, write my thesis in English and have this dual diploma. So if we come back to your career, the way you registered, the way it went over the 3-year period, are there any, pain points or mistakes that you can point out for future PhD students who might be lucky enough to do a co-supervised thesis? Well, I think that, it took me a while to understand the administrative systems for registration in the doctoral schools, for example. But then after that, I received an awful lot of very good support. So I didn't encounter any major difficulties. As previously mentioned, the co-supervised contract spells out where you're registered. So even if I wasn't physically in Swansea, I had to register at Swansea every year, as well as in France, here in Grenoble. And then 1 year out of 2, the fees were waived in one or other of the universities. Thank you for all of that information. Camille, I'm going to come back to you. Perhaps you can provide our students with some advice. Those who want to do a co-supervised thesis when there are 2 registrations, when the administration might be a little bit more heavy going. What can you tell us about timing, for example, for those who might be interested in doing this next year? Well, you need to start preparing things as soon as possible. There are 280 co-supervised theses at UGA at the moment, and we negotiate between 80 and 100 new agreements every year. And so it takes time. It does take time, the negotiation, the agreement. It can take up to 12 months, between 3 and 12 months. And so we accept applications from the first year to the beginning of the second year. If during your master's you have a project, you have an idea, come and see us, ask questions. We'll explain how things work, because there are admission phases for a thesis in both universities. So it's a dual battle, so to speak. So the earlier you start things, the better. If there's a pre-existing partnership between the universities, that's good. If you've got good communication between the two teams, then that's even better. And in terms of building your project, and I'll come back to mobility, which lasts for 12 months, it doesn't have to be consecutive what you do, but we do encourage you to spend 12 months on the trot in the university. This helps with, accommodation, setting up relationships. So that's a kind of a thing to look out for. Now, you're talking about outgoing mobility from France to the international arena. The international arena is very much tied to PhDs, and it's very much encouraged. There is financing offered by UGA, offered by doctoral schools, offered by laboratories. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about those. Well, there's no specific financing for co-supervised theses. So for co-supervision and co-directed theses, there are some things that are being developed, but for an incoming doctoral student attached to a university in Germany who spends 12 months in France as part of their mobility, they have to have financing for the 12 months. So there might be mobility grants, the programs, Vinci program, partnerships with Franco-Italian universities. There are all these things. There's also financing specific to the universities and co-financing with strategic partnerships with the UGA. So the University of Swansea has a partnership, the University of Tsukuba. There are lots, in fact, there are very, very many. And the list is very long, so it would be difficult to go through the whole list then. In an exhaustive manner, it would be difficult to go through it. We can also cite another type of financing that I was lucky to benefit from last year. Calls for projects and for help with international mobility. I wasn't a co-supervised PhD student. I did a conventional PhD, but I wanted to have some kind of international mobility. And I was lucky enough to be able to apply to a project for help with mobility, and I left for San Antonio University in Texas for 3 months, and this was financed. So I was there in the doctoral school. I was able to take part in seminars, to talk with the teachers there. It lasted 3 months, but I was still attached to the Grenoble University, but my travel and my accommodation was paid for by the university, and that I wouldn't have been able to finance that myself, especially not in the United States. So if you're not lucky enough to have a co-supervised PhD, there are other possibilities, other financing channels for international mobility. If you want to do a conventional PhD and just do a stay somewhere, this is possible, and you can do that in the second and third year mainly. You need to talk to your supervisor. There are often colleagues and partnerships abroad that can be explored. Perhaps before we move on specifically to manual, let's see if we've got any questions from the public, and I can see that we do have some questions. What about the payment of registration fees? How is that payment determined between the two universities? We've already had some information about that from Camille. It will really depend. Co-supervision, it's kind of made to measure. It will depend on the partnerships. For example, with the Canadian universities, registration fee payment is based on mobility. So if you're present for 3 semesters, you will pay for 3 semesters. So you look at the calendar, and at UGA, we can exonerate you for periods where you're in Canada. So we ask that registration fees be paid at least 1 year after the thesis, so they have to be paid for at the partner university, but there are possibilities of having waivers. Then there are other universities, like in the United States and Japan, where the registration fees are not the same amount. There might be specific agreements as well for doctoral students where the original university, where they only pay UGA, for example, and doctoral students from Japan only pay in Japan. But these are very specific made-to-measure conditions. Another question, how do you determine the university where you have to do the 120 hours of training or not? If in the other university the level of training, the number of hours is different. What kind of agreement might you have between the two universities for this? Well, same thing. It really depends on the universities. In France, you have to do 120 training programs, but co-supervision allows for less. If all of your training is carried out in the partner university, that can be accepted. The training is accepted. And in other universities, it's all about credits. So you have to find credit equivalences for training, but often it's fairly light at UGA. So I think I've answered all the questions. And a question for François now. In terms of Campus France, what possible aid might you have in terms of co-supervision, and what about outgoing mobility? Is there any kind of financial aid that can be delivered by Campus France? No, Campus France doesn't provide this kind of aid. It can help with embassies abroad. When they don't have very many grants, it really depends. So for financing mobility and transport, there are per diems, for example, for stays, the exoneration of registration fees. When there are a few means, it's usually for co-supervised thesis. For outgoing mobility, there is very little help. There's very little help from the ministry. You've got European help, there's Erasmus. In the European context, you can have aid, financial aid, through the Ministry for European Affairs. There is help for foreign students and other types of aid. But mainly, we're there to help students come to France in the best possible conditions for studying under a co-supervised thesis. Thank you. And we have one last question. Is it possible to go abroad with a CIFRE thesis? Now, would somebody like to answer that? Otherwise, I can tell you about a colleague with a CIFRE thesis who wants to go abroad. So you can have a tripartite agreement: the university, the research laboratory, and the private company or the local authority, and then the doctoral student. If the doctoral student wants to go abroad and the laboratory agrees to that, you also, in this case, have to have the agreement of the company. If it's an international company, it might be in one of the subsidies of the company abroad, but you have to have the agreement of the company. This makes things complex, and it means that the period during which you leave, the company is happy about you being abroad. So it might require looking at that point ahead of time, thinking about the doctoral project during the first few months of the PhD. Thank you. Let me just point out that there are CIFRE theses under co-supervision. And that's where things become very technical. So several companies abroad and in France? No, it's not that complex, just in France. Okay, thank you very much for these different insights. Now, Manuel, let me just remind you that you are in charge of the International Students and Scholars Office, the ISSO. What is the role of your organization within the UGA? So, it's already been said several times, PhD, it's all about an international environment. 1 out of 2 doctoral students are international. And there are different challenges for international students. One is finding a subject and financing, registering and preparing the doctoral work. And the second challenge, which is specific to international students, is managing to settle, arriving. getting familiar and understanding the keys of an environment that is quite different from the original country of the student. So faced with these challenges, UGA, for many, many years now, has been supporting students. It has a welcoming service dedicated for international students. It's the International Students and Scholars Office, or ISSO. So ISSO, what are its missions? Well, its objective is to inform, to support and welcome all international public, so students, PhD students, teachers, but also the families of all of these people. So we try and provide them with support, we assist them, we help them to prepare their arrival, we help them to settle in, and we answer their questions throughout their stay. We help them with administrative things, so we don't do things instead of the people, but we do provide information, we explain things, we guide them towards the right points of contact. So how do we do this? Well, our first support is a dedicated internet site that is connected to the UGA site. All students can find practical information on this site to prepare their stay or to help them during their stay, whether they're looking for accommodation, whether they want to take out health insurance, how the health system works in France, how they can go and see a doctor, different aids, different support so that they can benefit from at the university. And then once they're here, and if they don't find information on the portal, we have welcoming services. So doctoral students, international students can come and see us, whether we're talking about Grenoble or Valence, because we also have a branch in Valence, which is about an hour away from Grenoble. So we help them we've got a new building, it's called the Muse building, in fact, that groups together most of the departments dedicated to students. So there's the health centre, entrepreneurship department, sports department, a disability department, and ISSO is part of all of those departments for students and PhD students. So we can see you there if ever you want to do if ever you're an international student and want to come and do a PhD. So this allows international doctoral students not to waste any time with their administrative procedures. We've already seen doctoral students wasting a lot of time and energy because they weren't properly prepared for certain approaches. And sometimes in France, these approaches and procedures can take time. And it is a bit of a cultural shock, even if not everything is as disastrous as one might think from the outside. So our objective is to really reduce the time, to prepare them better, and so that they can really devote themselves to research, which is the main objective, but also make the most of the environment here in Grenoble, make the most of their doctoral experience, because we've said this already in Grenoble, we're in an exceptional environment. We've got some great mountains with some lovely ski resorts. You can go hiking, there are all kinds of outdoor activities, and it's a big campus, like an American campus, and it's a very dynamic school with lots of structures, lots of museums, most of them are free, so there's an awful lot to be done in Grenoble for a doctoral student, whether you were talking about research or anything else. So we try and facilitate their integration. So thank you. So very concretely, let's imagine that I'm a foreign student. I've been to Campus France, I've looked at the portal, I've come to UGA, and I've got my thesis that's been accepted. What time scales are we talking about? When should I be contacting your department? What advice would you give to people so that they don't waste too much time? Well, of course, the first piece of advice is to do things ahead of time. Don't wait to arrive to prepare for settling and doing your thesis. There's already a lot of information on the portal for international people. Campus France provides a lot of practical information as well for people settling here. You have to start by looking for accommodation first. Perhaps not too much ahead of time, but maybe 2 months ahead of time. Start to look at accommodation. It's more complicated in September because all of the students are already looking at the same time for accommodation, but the rest of the year, it's easier to, you can find accommodation within 2 or 3 weeks, even if you're doing this remotely. And then, it's good to find out as much information as possible before you arrive, but most of the approaches, most of the procedures can be done, in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And concretely, for students who only speak English and don't speak French, the interface with these different procedures, what's it like with your department? Is there some help with translation? How can you help and act as middlemen? Well, all of our teams speak English and French, so there's no problem welcoming foreign students who speak English. So there's the international portal that is entirely in English. And then there are other procedures managed by other departments that are not dependent on the university, that are not necessarily translated. So we try and explain things, explain the procedure as much as possible, so that then it's just a question of translation. There are translation tools that are used today, that are easily accessible. But, if we explain things first and foremost, explain why there are different steps in the procedure, then it's a question of vocabulary only. Thank you very much for these different pieces of information. I'm just seeing if there are any other questions from the students listening to us today. No more questions. That means that you were all especially clear. Thank you very much. Well done to all of you. And thank you once again for being with us. So this brings us to the end of the sequence. Thank you to our guest, François Pradel from Campus France, and our doctoral students, Destin, Lucas, Agatha, and also thank you, Camille and Fabrice from the UGA Doctoral College. And thank you to Emmanuel for being with us. Thank you also to all of you, our online students. If you still have questions after listening to all of this, don't hesitate to pass them on to us or use the chat, because even afterwards we can answer you. The address is given. The address that you can use for asking your questions is given in the chat. As explained at the beginning of the sequence, don't leave, because now we're going to meet one of our 13 thematic doctoral schools. Most of you have registered for one of these doctoral schools, and you can see them now displayed on the screen. So either you will be directed by the organization to your chosen doctoral school's virtual room, for which you will rename yourself, or you can choose the doctoral school by clicking on the button at the bottom called Salle de Répartition, breakout rooms, to display the list of doctoral school rooms, and then click on the one you wish to join.